Good morning, everyone. I'm Charles Overby, chairman of the Overby Center for Southern Journalism and Politics. I want to welcome you all here. Some of you here are voluntarily, and some of you are here for other reasons, but we're glad all of you are here. We have 7 programs this spring, and I think maybe it is beginning to be spring, and this is right in the middle, and it really showcases some of the best student work in journalism that has been done in the entire United States in the past year. And I'm proud to be able to introduce this program for 2 reasons, for 3 reasons. First, because of this excellent student work that we're going to be talking about today. Second, because of what the Voting Rights Act has meant to my generation and to Mississippi at large. When I was growing up, it was hardcore, enforced legal segregation. Civil War took place 100 years before that, but nothing had happened. Things didn't begin to change until the Voting Rights Act was approved. And then things began to change big time. And so I'm interested in seeing the students' perspective on this. I've read it. Bill Rose will talk about this. This is a terrific piece of work here, and look forward to hearing the students talk about it. The third reason I wanted to come from Nashville today to introduce this program is because of my friend Bill Rose. Bill and I were friends at Ole Miss a few years ago, and we worked on the Daily Mississippian together. And it shows you that the friends you make in college often are the friends you have the rest of your life. And we're so pleased that Bill now is an adjunct instructor here and is also a fellow at the Overby Center. And he has led this project. It's, is this the 4th year, Bill? 5th year that he has led a major investigative effort in journalism. He succeeded professionally in a big way at the Miami Herald, where he had a number of jobs, including editor of the Sunday magazine. And then he went up to the Palm Beach Post and was the top editor there. So we're lucky to have him here at Ole Miss sharing his wisdom, and I'm lucky that he's been my friend most of my life. Bill Rose.
The Mississippi Delta is a place like no other. When Roy Reed of the New York Times was sent to the Delta back in the 1970s to try to describe what it was, he saw all the poverty, he saw all the bad health, he saw the vestiges of supposedly banned segregation, and then he met all these people in these wonderful homes and looked at their libraries and looked at their travel experience and got involved in the social world of the Delta. And he tried to reconcile the two worlds, and on the front page of the New York Times, he described the Delta as a phantasmagoria. Well, nobody knew what that was then. Nobody knows what it is today. So we went to find out, after all these years, what the Voting Rights Act had accomplished in the Mississippi Delta. And the main thing it accomplished, of course, was political power shifted to the majority. It's a majority black area. Suddenly they had the vote and politics changed. But, and I'm going to roam and ask questions and let the students talk in this presentation so you can get some sense of what it's like to work on a project like that. But I want to start by asking Kaylee Skinner, who came here from Jackson today to be with us, where she works for the Hechinger Report, covering education issues, graduate of Ole Miss, took this course last year. And I picked up the Clarion Ledger one morning, and there's Kaylee's story spread all over the front page. And I knew that she was doing fine. So, Kaylee, let me just ask you, what did the Voting Rights Act accomplish all that black people hoped it would accomplish in the Delta?
Well, ultimately it did obviously give them the right to vote. It took away the literacy tests and the poll taxes, so they were allowed to put people in office. But the Delta is still one of the poorest places in the country, and so what are these people in power even governing over? It didn't integrate the schools. White people pulled their children out of public schools. It's white flag is what it's called, and opened private schools. So a lot of these families are still today on welfare, still very poor. It's just, I don't think it did everything that it was intended to do.
Right. So it could do a lot of things, but it couldn't change the social order in the Delta in the final analysis for the money. Let me turn to Clancy, and just ask Clancy Smith, how did what you find in the Delta differ from what you expected to find?
I think there's this huge image that we have of the Delta of just flatlands, plains, majority African American population, and what we found there was a lot more life than we expected, I think. It was just really fun to be a part of the culture there and to see everything that the Delta has to offer. It's a huge hub for blues music, and we got to meet a lot of really neat people there who've done a lot to affect the political culture, not only in Mississippi, but also in the rest of the nation. And I think that we just found a lot more life there than we expected, a lot more culture, and we're exposed to a lot of things that we never would have expected before we visited there. And I think if given the opportunity, all of you should visit there too. It's a really great place to be and a great place to learn more about.
All right, I'm going to turn to Mary Marge Locker and just ask, what was the hardest thing you had to do? What was the most difficult thing for you to do? You're not a journalism student. You'd never taken a journalism course until she took this course. Just coming in out of the cold, as it were, from English, right?
Yes.
And what was the toughest thing about it to you?
I was straight up horrified to interview people. I was horrified to call people on the phone and try and schedule an interview. Every time I tried to introduce myself over the phone, I just completely lost what I was talking about. And I was like, I'm from Ole Miss. I can't remember what I'm calling you for. So that was really hard for me. But as soon as we started doing interviews and got down to the Delta and really started to meet people, and I realized that it really became more of a conversation. Beforehand I would make these long lists of detailed questions, and you never really end up asking those questions. You end up having a conversation with a person and really getting to know how they feel about where they live and how they feel about their environment. And sometimes we ask specific questions about the Voting Rights Act, sometimes we just talked about people's lives. So I feel like I learned a skill that I'd never, I don't know, I guess a lot of you are journalism students and you know how to interview people, but it was really hard for me, and I know for some other people it wasn't their strongest suit either. I think I emerged with a real skill, and I was really happy I did it, and also got to know really amazing people in the Delta.
Let me ask Molly Mansfield. Molly, you interviewed some interesting people. Tell me a little bit about Margaret Block.
Well, Margaret Block was one of my last interviews, and she was a firecracker, to say the least. I can really relate to the interviewing process being rather difficult, especially with Margaret Block. I think abrasive might be kind of a right word. You really couldn't get anything out of her. We would sit there. We had Bill was there, Joe was there, I had someone else there helping me, and we were just trying to really just talk to her about her life. And a lot of my interviews had turned into conversations just about, people love to tell stories, and people love to tell stories about their lives, and it was really, really hard to get those details out of her. And especially because she really wanted, she wanted to talk to you about the Voting Rights Act, but she also kind of felt like she had been snubbed a lot throughout the past, few years since, the civil rights in the 1950s, and since she was doing the bulk of her work. And so she was a little entitled, and so that was quite the interesting interview, I would say. But her story was a really, really wonderful story to write, and I'm really glad that I got to interview her, for sure. But.
So Logan, when you got to the Mississippi Delta, I mean, you were doing multimedia, you were doing reporting, you were doing a lot of things. Was it hard to get people to talk to you? What was it like? I mean, here you are, you're students, you're strangers, you're going to come into a place that's totally alien to you. You're not from the Delta, are you? No, first time you'd ever been there. So what was that like?
Well, I'm from Tuscaloosa, Alabama, so I've never been to the Delta before, and I really didn't even know where it was located on the map. So I go over there, and you know, I was kind of a novice photographer. I was still kind of learning the ropes, and you know, for one thing, it's interviewing people's tough, and it's hard to get answers from people. But when you hold up a camera lens, people tend to just like duck and cover. I know a lot of you people do that, especially on campus when we're taking photos of people. So definitely, you have to sit down and actually have a conversation with the person and get to know them. One of the things I did is I went with Katie, and we went with Charles McLaurin, and we did this tour, and we went through different places in the Delta, and we went to Money, Mississippi, which is where, you know, the Emmett Till situation happened, and I was able to photograph him and video him, and it was absolutely amazing. Just sitting in a car with a stranger and getting to hear his story, that was probably a good bonding experience that helped me kind of be able to turn on the camera and tell him what I was doing. So definitely being somewhere unfamiliar definitely keeps you on your toes, but you also have to figure out how to make just yourself comfortable, and you also have to figure out a way to make the person you're interviewing comfortable. I think that's if you're not comfortable, then the person you're interviewing will not be comfortable. So just remember that.
Let me go down here to Deborah Whitley. Deborah, what did you learn in the Delta about how black people were treated back before the Voting Rights Act was passed?
Okay, well, my profile piece was actually about Congressman Benny Thompson, and he shed a lot of light on how he was raised. So whenever he was growing up, when he was 6 years old, he would walk through his neighborhood, and he noticed how the divide between like the black neighborhoods and the white neighborhood occurred. He said they had no sidewalks in his neighborhoods, they had no fire hydrants. Whenever he was at home and he was taking a bath, he could always tell when his neighbors were taking a bath because his water pressure would be a lot lower. In high school, he had to drive 52 miles away just to go to high school, just to get an education, because the schools, the public schools in his hometown, he had no access to them because they were white only, so he wasn't able to go. And then in speeches like with other people that I interviewed, I just saw how difficult it was, and like even when the Voting Rights Act was passed, there was a lot of like backlash from people trying to get out there and vote, because it was all this intimidation, like especially financially wise. Back to Congressman Thompson, he told me that whenever he decided to run for office, he was actually called into his job where he was a teacher and fired, just because he wanted to make a change, just because he wanted to do something positive. So it was a lot of like logistics and the literacy test, all that kind of stuff that we always hear about, but you just don't know like the intimidation, the pressure that people would put on you. It was a societal thing. Like if you wanted to do more or vote or just wanted to like progress, people kind of looked down on you, and they made it very difficult for your everyday life, even other factors in your life.
Thanks. Let me go back to Logan here and just ask, Logan, you were with Katie Adcock, who's not here today, and Katie wrote a story about Charles McLaurin. Do you remember some of the things that happened to him?
Charles is a very interesting guy. He's actually, the most vivid things I remember is him being with Martin Luther King Jr. whenever they did their walks. And one of the things that really stuck out to me was when they were in Greenwood, Mississippi, which if you've ever been to Greenwood, Mississippi, it's still pretty segregated today. People talk about, you know, the railroad tracks being the way that it separates, so you can easily tell the difference. You know, one side looks really pretty, and then one side actually looks like the slums. So definitely there's still some segregation there today. But he talked about how they were marching around this playground, and we actually got to go there and see the playground itself, and the marker there, which talked about, you know, the people that were standing there blocking them, trying to keep them from walking. And it was just, I mean, the stories that he had were just, they were so intriguing. The things he talked about, the things he faced. I mean, people were attacking him. So I think that, you know, Charles was just such a phenomenal guy. I mean, he's so passionate about what he wants to teach. And the thing that really stuck with me is that, you know, when kids come up to him and ask him about the movement, then he knows that, you know, he's doing his job, that he wants to help educate the people. And I think that's what he's doing today.
we can't mention Charles McLaurin, who got thrown in jail and beat up in jail and beat up out of jail all the time when he was working for SNCC in the Delta. Can't mention him without pointing out a couple of people who were very nice to us during the reporting of this course from Indianola. David Rushing, who I believe is a former advisor to the Daily Mississippi Student Media Center. Yeah, and was that's David, stand up, let people see you. Reporter in the Delta for a long time, and a good one. And seated next to him is Jim Abbott, who was the guy, you got to stand up. Another Ole Miss grad, who was the editor of the Enterprise Tocsin, the weekly newspaper in Indianola at a time when it was not easy to be an editor with a conscience in Indianola. So I want to just thank y'all for all you did with us, for us over there. So y'all went to the Delta, and for the first time, and you know, you hear things about the Delta. You hear things about crime, you hear things about poverty, you hear things about all kinds of bad stuff that happens. Did you, you know, some of you are thinking, well, if I got sent to the Delta, would I be safe? Because we reported this, most of it, on spring break. All these people sacrificed their spring break to work, and they worked hard for 5 days during spring break. I can see some of you turning up your nose right now. It's okay, but they produced a great product as a result of it, and they got better as a result of it. But when you went over there, Katie Herring, did you find Clarksdale, where we stayed, safe? Tell me about that.
I felt very safe there. I remember the first time when I went over was before spring break. This is last year, and you know, it seems kind of like an empty city. But you know, I went everywhere with Bill and Joe, our other professor, and you know, there wasn't anyone really threatening, although we were talking about some different places. There's a gas station there that's one of the most dangerous places in the Delta, and it has to have a security guard stand outside the door just to keep people from stealing and armed robberies and things like that. But
she's not kidding. It's been robbed about 25 times.
But it used to be a really dangerous place and one of the biggest hubs for drug trafficking and gangs up to Chicago. But it's changed a lot since then. One of my stories is about Henry Espy, and he was the first black mayor in the Delta. And it was really cool to see how he went from, you know, he knew a lot of people and he did a lot of networking, and he was finally able to gain office and have a place in the city and have the council. But he had a lot to do with breaking down those barriers and taking away the gang presence from the city, and that was really cool to see.
Great. I want to get down here to this end of the room, and I'll start with Kristen. You know, we worked on this for a whole semester, and then we dumped a lot of stuff, a lot of content on the designers. That's always the way for designers. They're sitting there with a big catcher's mitt waiting. And then here comes the, you know, about 50 balls at once. And they're expected to catch it and make something really, really interesting and nice out of it. So what was that experience like? What was the biggest challenge for you when y'all were trying to design this book?
Oh, I've got one here. I've got a mic. Maybe an echo. I think probably our biggest challenge was, you know, whenever we're dealing with a topic that halfway deals with present day and halfway deals with the past, you know, you run into challenges as far as photography is concerned. You know, what are you going to photograph? And, you know, I'm sure Philip will talk about it in a little bit. But that was one of our main things whenever we were first given all of the content, is we were like, okay, you know, we've got black and white photos, we've got photos from present day, so how are we going to really tell the story, not only through the written story, but also through the photography within this publication? And so we really tried to make them really blend together from the past and present. And so I think that was one of our main challenges, was just figuring out, you know, with the limited amount of photos from present day, you know, how do you really tell that story? And I think by us looking at this situation specifically at how it impacted the Delta, you know, because the Voting Rights Act, it impacted the nation, but it impacted the Delta in a special way that, you know, we really wanted to make sure that that shined through. So making sure that it really told the perspective of the Delta was what we wanted to do to tell that story.
Right. And Allison, what was your experience? What did you like about the design experience, and what drove you crazy?
There are so many beautiful stories and profiles in this magazine, and going through as a designer, you know, you read the content and you connect with those stories, and you have to find a way to make that story shine and to make that story special. One of the things that drove me a little bit crazy was in our class, we had a lot of different perspectives. We had journalism students and IMC and art students. And while that kind of created a little bit of friction, because we all have different ways of thinking and different ways of designing, it also kind of helped us bounce ideas off of each other.
Right. Let me talk to another visual person, Philip Waller, who was one of three photographers, Jared Burleson and Thomas Granny, also shot in the Delta. I was looking for Thomas to see if he sneaked in.
He's in class, I think.
He's in class, okay. So what was it like shooting in the Delta, and what were your favorite shots?
Well, I've been in the Delta a few times now on various trips and capacities. This is my actually third year in some capacity with the Delta project. This is sort of a culmination of a lot of years of sort of getting involved with the area. And to tell you what, the Delta makes great photographs. I mean, everyone has a story to tell, and when you can get people comfortable, like Logan was saying, and telling their story, that's when you really get good visuals. And so I think what we sort of benefited the most from in the Delta was sort of this teamwork aspect that we had with the writers and photographers. We even had photographers, excellent photographers in their own right, Logan and Katie Herring, go along with us on some of these stories, and we were able to sort of balance the writing and the photography aspect of the publication and really have a deep conversation about the limited visuals that we could get. Because a lot of these stories focused on 50 years ago. So how do you put that, like Kristen was saying, how do you put that 50 years ago story into context for today? And so it ended up taking a lot of portraits. You'll see this in the magazine. You'll see a lot of building mugs, present-day photos of civil rights sites, photos of current Delta citizens interacting in a way they wouldn't have been able to interact before. One of my favorite stories that I got a chance to photograph was a group of students at the Blues Museum. And they were having a workshop where they got to create art and learn about some issues that were affecting them. And I got to go in and basically spend a day with them and enjoy this sort of spring break camp just like they were. And getting kids to cooperate is definitely a challenge. So you'll see a lot of candids from that story. But I tell you, my favorite photo, I think, was actually my photo of Mr. Abbott over here. It was in front of the Blues Museum. Noonday sun, really challenging lighting, but it allowed me to sort of take that challenge and run with it. And I used some creative lighting techniques. And the Delta magazine gives you, I think, more time to really spend on the visuals than you would maybe on a day-to-day grind with the Daily Mississippian or other publications. You're able to really invest time into it to get good work. And I think it shows in some of the photographs we had here. I think if the other photographers were here, they'd say the same thing. Thomas and Jared are both excellent photographers, and I can see them doing more great work in the future with this publication.
So Deborah, during this course, we met a lot of people in the Delta who are, holdovers is not the right word, but maybe survivors from civil rights activism, the 60s particularly, who are still around. And we looked them up and we interviewed them and we told their stories. Did you already know all this, or was this a revelation to you?
I would say that I knew that a lot of people that were still there have gone through things, but you never know anyone's story until you talk to them. So it was really like enlightening to meet these people, and like Logan said, get to know them and really hear what they had gone through and how they overcame it. One lady in particular, Doris Lee, she works with the shelter down there in Greenville, and I got to talk to her for my story about Congressman Thompson. And she not only was able to share some of the things that she's gone through, but some of the families that she's worked with, some things that have happened with them and how Congressman Thompson and just other people in the community were able to help. So I think when you take the time to just get to know people and see, like you hear about these things, but until you immerse yourself into the community, you don't really understand the impact that they have on the way people's lives progress.
Okay, great. You know, when students that have never done a course like this, they sometimes wonder, okay, I'm giving up my spring break. I'm going to work my rear end off. Am I going to have any fun? Delta's pretty bleak, unless you live there and you learn where all the fun is. Mary Marge, did you have any fun? Why did I ask Mary Marge?
Yeah, we had a great time. So we stayed in Clarksdale above Ground Zero, the blues club, and that was a lot of fun, you know.
What were those rooms like?
The apartments?
What were the apartments like?
Well, I have this very vivid memory of us all getting there and waiting for Bill to arrive with the keys. No, not you to arrive. Someone else to arrive with the keys. And everyone ran upstairs and was fighting each other for rooms. But they were all ended up being really great and very different from like a hotel. It was very homey and I don't know, it was great. They were all right by each other. We all hung out. And, you know, I didn't really know most of these people when we went on the trip. And we ended up being like friends, hanging out at night in our rooms. But Ground Zero being downstairs was really fun. And we would go like have lunch there between interviews and everybody would kind of compare their day's successes and troubles. That was great. The mayor of Clarksdale, Bill Luckett, hosted us for a night at his house, which was a lot of fun, kind of treated us and then took us to Ground Zero, which he owns, for dinner and drinks, and we all danced, and it was great. Yeah, and then we went to Po Monkeys. We're talking about that. We went to Po Monkeys on Thursday night as kind of like a planned excursion, and
You're going to have to tell them what Po Monkeys is.
okay, it's in Marigold, correct? Marigold, Mississippi, kind of between Greenville and Clarksdale, and it's this strange little house kind of up on stilts. It's a bar, juke joint, okay, sorry. This was a year ago. And the man who runs it is called Po Monkey, and the entire bar is filled with monkeys on the walls, and it's a very I mean, you just have to go. Now that I've told you about it, just go see for yourself. We went there and had a great time. Yeah, I don't know. I think it was really fun. I kind of struggled with the idea of giving up spring break for it because I wanted to do a trip with my friends, but you know, these people ended up being my friends, and so it was a really great trip. And yeah, I would say do it. There was just as much hard work as there was fun and goofing off and making new friends. I don't know.
Great. So, Kaylee, was this course worth it? And what was the most important thing you learned about journalism in this course?
For me, I learned the importance of, or I learned to appreciate how much work it takes to do a story that takes like 3 or 4 months. Because before this, I had just done work with the Daily Mississippian or like newspaper dailies where you call someone once, you write down what they say, and then you turn it into an article the next day. And this one, I took some trips with you before we actually went to the Delta, spent an entire week reporting in the Delta, and then I still had to go back like afterwards. So it was important for me to learn that it's okay to call someone back again and again and again, just to make sure you got the details right, make sure you get as much out of the story as you can. And it taught me a lot for the job that I have now, which is depth reporting, where it takes so much time to write one story. So this taught me that it is possible to be like a real journalist. Like before, I would just like do stuff for the Mississippian, and it was like a fun side thing, but it gave me confidence. And Bill was there every step of the way. If I was stumbling over something, I would call him and be like, I don't know what to ask. I don't know how to get in touch with this person. And Bill knows everybody in the Delta. So it was just, it made me grow a lot.
I think we would profit from hearing others on that question too. Molly, tell me what you learned. What was the main thing you learned during this course?
I think one of the things that I learned similar to Kaylee, was just persistence. Just because it was hard. It was hard to give up a spring break. It was hard to have to keep calling people back, to get in touch with Margaret Block, because she was a very, very busy woman. I ended up finishing my stories in August. I had to finish a story after last summer because I was taking summer school and I didn't get an interview in. And so it was just to continually just to fight to finish a story, and also to not be afraid of failure, and just to ask for help. I think that was a big one, because I think a lot of us, it's like you want to do it on your own, and you want to make a great product, but at the same time, you have Bill and you have Joe, and they've been doing this for years, and they're really wonderful advisors, and they're very wise, and so it was very humbling to have to be like, I don't know what to do with this lead, or I don't know what to do with this next part of the story, and just to kind of get some guidance. So I would definitely say persistence, especially because I ended up switching my major that semester, not because of this class. But so I think that this class is definitely something I'll look back on with very fond memories, but learned a lot of very valuable life lessons that, regardless of what I'm doing, I'll be able to take with me. So.
Well, I definitely learned a lot from this project and this class. I struggled really hard with writing the magazine piece itself, because you get to use a lot more creativity with your writing. And I was so used to doing cut and dry news stories for the newspaper or for class. And Bill can vouch me on this, is I would go into his office like pulling my hair out and be like, I don't know what to do. Like I try my best to be creative, but then I feel like I'm using biased language. He's like, you can do that. Like, it's not biased language. You were there. And so it really helped me understand how you can convey the image to the audience in a very storytelling fashion. And definitely, also, you know a lot. You know a lot more than you think you know, especially doing your reporting. You talk to all these people and you understand the story. But when you go to write it down, you feel like you know what's going on, and you put it down on paper. But when you reread it or you give it to someone else, they're like, well, I don't understand where this came from. And we're like, oh, well, it's because it came from this year, or it came from this publication. And then they're like, okay, we need to write that down. So it definitely helped me understand that, I may understand the story, but you have to write it in the way that the reader will understand it fully. There can't be any missing gaps. So I definitely, and everyone talked about growing up as a reporter, this definitely, when you got down to the Delta, you would call someone and say, hey, I need to meet with you. What time works for you? And it's like, okay, well, I can meet with you at 3 o'clock. Okay, well, you're 2 hours away, so you need to get in the car and drive there. So definitely, you just kind of had to grow up and call the phone. You couldn't say, well, I'll call him later, or I'll email him. That just doesn't work. You can never do that. If you want to get a story that really tells it, you need to meet with them in person, because there are things that in interviews that just come out, and you would never get that in a phone interview, and you would never get that through an email. So just remember that. So.
Piggybacking off of what he said, it was really important to meet in person, because we're not going there to ask them about some small news story. We're asking these people, what was it like to be told that you can't eat at the front of this milkshake stand, or to be arrested and beaten because of the color of your skin. So I think that's not a phone conversation, and it was just great because you got to see the look in their eyes, and 50 years later how they feel about it.
This class really taught me how to write. It was my second journalism class ever. I was a freshman with all of these seniors and juniors, and on the first day of class we had to write something, and then they took it all up and started reading them. And I just remember sitting there and being like, oh my God, please don't read what I wrote. I was so scared because I'm a photographer. Writing has not been my thing, but it really made me comfortable with writing, and it was such a privilege to go to do these stories and to sit in these people's homes. I did a story on teachers, and I got to sit in their homes and talk to them about their classrooms over the years, and I got to go into one of the classrooms today and see how, they have nothing, they have so little resources, but they care so much about their students, and they care so much about the betterment of the Delta, and they know that education is a huge part of that. And so just to see what they're doing to help the kids was really awesome. But I really learned how to write. We did so many drafts of our stories, and you know, once you take something and you just revise it and revise it, it just keeps getting better. And it was really cool to take these lives that very few people know about and to create a piece that can share that with anyone, anywhere now. You know, it shows their classroom, it shows the kids, and just how much they care about it. And that's definitely my favorite part about journalism, is sharing these people's stories so that more change can happen.
I don't know. Okay. So I obviously was new to journalism and interviewing, and I think what I learned was that, especially in the Delta, and especially with the kind of people that I met, I could not predict what anyone was going to tell me. You know, one of my favorite people I interviewed, I talked to several times, her name was Levi, and she's 96 years old, black woman who has lived in Greenville her entire life. And, you know, I was really excited to ask her about the civil rights movement and the VRA and how it affected her life, and I expected bitterness, and she was just like, I've led the best life ever, you know, it never bothered me, it never affected me. And you know, and then I met her son, and he was just enraged, had moved to Chicago at a young age, like had to get out of the Delta. And so you can't categorize what anyone's going to say, you know. And I also learned, like what Logan was saying, you just have to like buck up and be fearless and go meet people where they want to meet, you know, go to their home, because that's where you're going to get the most comfortable interview, and they're going to tell you the most stuff. And I also, I think some of the most successful interviews we had would be when we were working together in a group. Kaylee and I, and Logan and I went on several interviews together, and I think those were some of the most productive ones, where we were both writing about different topics, but we could kind of integrate them into this really great conversation with our interviewee. And I don't know, I learned how to interview people. It was great.
I think for me, it was weird. It didn't hit me until the second or third day that I was actually being a reporter. I would wake up in Clarksdale every day, and my stories were based in Indianola, Mississippi, which was about an hour away. And I think I was one of the only people on the trip working primarily in Indianola. So every morning I would wake up and drive to Indianola by myself and meet with people. And there was one day where I had 3 or 4 interviews in the same day. It was I guess everyone in Indianola was free that day. And, but I had to get those 3 or 4 interviews done that day, and I drove down there really early by myself, and I got lost, my GPS messed up, and I only had a sleeve of Oreos from a gas station for lunch. And I loved it, and it just really solidified for me, this is what I love to do, and love talking to those people and just learning more about them. I can genuinely say that I made friends on that trip in the people that I interviewed. Loved working with Mr. Jim Abbott, one of my favorite people that I worked with on this reporting trip. And I guess the hardest thing for me was actually afterwards in the writing process, putting pen to paper and doing justice to these amazing people that you meet, because you want to write the most incredible story that does them justice and just makes them really proud, and that's scary, you know? And so that was really hard, but Mr. Bill and Mr. Joe, who couldn't be here today, are just incredible people, and really helped us write something that would make the people that we interviewed really proud, which was fun for us.
I would say for me, I definitely learned how to consume a lot of information and then spit it back out in a way to tell a story. And that wasn't something that was easy for me. Like, I had many times I met in Bill's office, and I told him, like, I know what I want to say, I just don't know how to say it, can you help me? And so I'm not a journalism major. I'm actually an integrated marketing communications major. And I tell people all the time, I picked it because I love running my mouth. And like on like day 1 of going to the Delta, I soon found out that people in the Delta like running their mouth. So interviewing wasn't a problem for me. Once I like introduced myself and they introduced themselves to me, we just got the ball rolling. We started talking. Like, I recorded all my interviews, and if you go look at the tapes, a lot of them are like past the hour mark. So that wasn't a problem, but it was just taking all the things that people would tell me and figuring out what was important enough or what was relevant enough to be included in the story, because you only have so much room, and you only have so much space. You have this time that somebody's looking at your work to tell this story about this person. They've done this and they've done that. Congressman Thompson he currently serves as the longest elected official, longest elected African-American official in the state of Mississippi. So that's a really big accomplishment, and I want to make sure that not only did I acknowledge that, but the things that led him to that point, and then all the other things that he does in the community. So taking all the interviews that people gave me, it was really hard to do that. And then another thing I learned was time management, and then I guess navigation skills, because Congressman Thompson, he represents the Delta all the way down to Jackson. So one day I would have to go to Greenwood, one day I would have to go to Greenville, Mount Bayou, Jackson. One day I had to go to Greenwood and Greenville in the same day. And so I think I ran out of data like on my phone trying to navigate myself to different places. So it was fun. I mean, I spent a lot of time on the road getting to know myself, like Clancy said, because I had to go to these different locations by myself. And so I would kind of prepare what I wanted to ask people. But getting there, talking to them, it was just so fun because you learn so much.
Allie, let me just ask specifically. You know, we kind of ran out of photos, believe it or not, on some stories. Some stories we shot a lot of, and some stories, some things fell through and we didn't. How tough was that to design with a limited photo pool? Because you mentioned the past and the present. How tough was the photo situation?
That was definitely a big challenge for us. I would say we realized going through, we kind of thought to ourselves, we're going to have to lean pretty heavily on graphics and typography. So we, as Darren would put it, we embraced the white space. If you're going through, you got some beautiful white space on the side. But that just gave us an opportunity to make great graphics. Like on the cover, that was our first assignment, was to design the cover, and all we had to go on, we didn't have the content at that point, all we had to go on was this land of broken promises. So I kept thinking to myself what that meant and about the Voting Rights Act, and one of the things that kept coming up in my mind was, you know, that quote, "We shall overcome." And it wouldn't go away. So when I was going through designing my covers, I thought, you know what, I'm not going to try to find a photo, I'm just going to go on typography. I'm just going to try to make something that's going to shock people. And I think it does. So that's something I'm pretty proud of. And I think we did a great job with those graphics and with that typography to get these photos and these stories to come to life on the page.
Kristen, would you agree?
Yeah, I would. Yeah, it was definitely a struggle, you know, trying to figure out, you know, some of the stories, like you said, you know, they would have one photo, or sometimes, you know, we were trying to figure out what photo to put in there. And once we decided and realized, you know, we would have to go with the white space or we would have to create graphics, I completely agree. Whenever I was designing the main story, what I wanted to do is I just sat down and read the story itself. And you know, that's one thing that I definitely want to compliment the writers on. Those stories were so well written. I really wanted to read that story to really understand the person, really understand the story that was being told. And by doing that, I mean, it made it so much easier to design because you realized the tone, you realized, you know, what you wanted to put in there. And sometimes that was, you know, a chart, and, you know, that can be kind of difficult to put a chart in, you know, a magazine that you'd really like to be photograph driven, but I think the data that was there was very compelling, you know, to design, and so it ended up not being as difficult as I thought it would be, just because, I mean, the stories themselves, I mean, you know, they paint the picture. So
we've got time for a couple of questions, and I wonder if anyone has a question for any of our panelists or for me. Yes, ma'am.
I really think, just as a Mississippian and someone really interested in racial reconciliation as it involves our entire state, that people tend to traffic in this like dichotomous idea of the Delta, like it's either like this black
People, I think, tend to traffic in this dichotomous idea of the Delta, where it's either like this ideal post-racial fishbowl where everyone holds hands and like don't think about sharecropping anymore, or it's still just a black and white like wasteland. And so like I guess how do you view like this like I don't know, this view of the Delta, like what should we know from you about what the Delta is and what we should learn, and how like in the present like this place matters to us and the rest of the state?
I'd like to take that one.
Okay. Charge.
Thank you for asking that, Sierra. So I also resent kind of the dichotomous view. But something I learned, I worked on a story in Clarksdale that didn't actually make it in the magazine because a lot has changed in the past year since I wrote the article. But it was about a biracial committee that they have started in Clarksdale to work toward racial reconciliation and talking about issues of race, but beyond that, issues of economy and drug problems and education and all kinds of stuff in Clarksdale. And so I did all these really fascinating interviews with people involved with this program, and I worked with this woman named Terry, who I just adored, and she was new to Clarksdale from Little Rock. And she described herself as middle-aged, light-skinned black woman, and she said, "There is no place for me in Clarksdale," and I said, "Why?" And she said, because it's not a black and white society, it's just a closed society in general, that there's this cliquishness to towns in the Delta that isn't just a matter of race, but that they don't, and I mean, it doesn't speak for everyone, but there was a large tone and she had a really hard time trying to integrate herself into any part of the society. She said she wasn't invited to Christmas parties. She wasn't invited to, fundraisers, and that's why she joined this committee to try and, find a place for herself. And she said that she didn't know if it was going to be possible, even though she had this great job and a wonderful place in society. And but I met so many other people who and I started asking that question. I started saying, can you talk to me about Delta cliques, because I was fascinated by it. And all the different people I asked said, yeah, that's a thing, and they didn't go into the detail that she did because they didn't know what the outside of the cliquishness looked like. But that, I think, it doesn't resist the dichotomy in a positive way, but it does resist the dichotomy, and it does give you a deeper look at what it's like there, and like the committee in Clarksdale shows you that they are trying to fix it. So it's both a negative and a positive. But if anybody else had something to say.
Kayla, you had a thought too.
I think you did a really good job answering that. But going into the black and white thing, I noticed a lot when I was interviewing people that if I would ask a white person anywhere in the Delta, like, do you think things are better? Do you think things have changed? And they would say, yeah, of course, look around. Like, there are black people and white people in the same restaurant, no colored restrooms. But then when I ask black people, they'd be like, it's better, but it's not good. And I can see that because a lot of the people were alive when it was like that, and it's hard to forget that. And so I really do think it depends on who you ask. Like, one of my stories is about Al Rankins, who was a cop in the 60s, that he wasn't allowed to arrest white people. And I think the final quote of my story, he says, white kids and black kids, they'll play together, but when they grow up is when the problems start. So I think there's still a lot of work to be done.
That's a great quote to end on. We've gone right at 50 minutes, and I want to thank y'all. You've been a great audience, and I think we owe a round of applause to these students for this extraordinary work.